HR leaders across government are listing resilience as one of the key qualities they want to build in their workforces. Those leaders tell me they're starting to think about resilience in several different ways. Rachna Krishnan is CEO and Executive Director of the Women's Center. The Women's Center sponsors this edition of the FedGov Today podcast. Rachna, welcome. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for joining me today. This concept of resilience, what's your sense of how people are defining it in the workplace differently now than they did in the past? And how does that inform the way that people should think about mental health and the term that you use that I really like, holistic wellness? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So, so much has changed since COVID. Our concept of what work is, what home is, sometimes those lines have blurred, honestly. And there's been this trend for employers, for organizations to think about holistic wellness, which, was not a term we ever used pre-COVID, honestly. And, a new trend, a new thought is really to bring your whole self to work. And I think that goes a lot towards DEI efforts, or really towards creating engagement with your employees. So I know that from a holistic perspective, from a mental health perspective and a domestic violence perspective, we are very focused on a person's mental well-being, on the ability for a person to be able to function in society. Domestic violence, mental health issues really take away a person's ability to function with their families, function at work, function in society. So we realize the value of creating resilient communities, and you really create resilient communities one individual at a time, to be honest. And when you have resilient individuals, when you have resilient communities, they can take this to work, right? And then they can be more productive employees, they can be better colleagues, they can be better supporters, they can be more engaged. And that's really so important. And it's so important, actually, when we look at our outcomes, when we look at, are our services working? Are people getting better? The questions that we ask, the surveys that we use, the tools that we use, actually ask them, are you functioning better? Are you being more productive? Are you being more impactful? So that's a big part of holistic wellness, and really being able to bring your whole self to work and being present and engaged at work.
You use a couple of terms when we were chatting before we went on the air, and in the materials, some of the things that you've written about recently. You referred to both workforce and community resilience. And I got a sense when we were chatting earlier that you and I had maybe different definitions of community. When I was thinking about community, I was thinking about this from the perspective of a federal agency. Workforce is workforce, and I think that definition is pretty uniform. But when I was thinking about community, I was thinking more about the community of people around that workforce. If 50,000 people work for an agency, they've got spouses and they've got family and they've got friends and so on. That's the community I was thinking about, rather than a geographic location. And I wonder if that difference, if that distinction makes any kind of a difference in the way that one should think about the community that surrounds the people that it cares about. In the case of the listeners to this show, to the human capital people that are thinking about resilience in their workforces.
Sure. That's an interesting question. As a nonprofit and as an agency or a group that provides service in the community, we tend to think of community as a geographic region, or someone or a community that has a common theme or something. So for us to kind of think about a community as employees in one company, that's a slightly different way to think about it, but it really ends up all blurring together. In all honesty, I don't think there's any one workplace community that doesn't bleed into the general community, because as you said, each individual as they bring their whole self to work and they bring their whole mental self to work, they're still thinking about their wife or their husband. They're thinking about their kids. They're thinking about their neighbors. There is no, I don't think there's true separation of the broader geographic community with the community of one company or organization. I really think that's a tough line to draw. That's a really tough line to draw.
You used another term when we were talking before we went on that I think is interesting, and that's stickiness. What does that mean, and how should someone who's thinking about building a strong workforce and keeping momentum in a strong workforce, how should that person think about that word stickiness?
So what I have seen in all the research we have done and we work with a lot of organizations, we work with a lot of corporate sponsors and whatnot, and we do webinars in the community, et cetera. For sure, we know that this new generation of people, and actually almost everyone post-COVID, really wants a sense of purpose. They want a sense of purpose in their family, but they want a sense of purpose at work. And with people that are so distributed and remote working, as leaders, we think about how can we create engagement and stickiness at work. And the way to increasing retention engagement is through corporate social responsibility. Over and over again, we see companies and organizations that have purpose, that have a sense of corporate social responsibilities. Their retention is very good. It's really much higher. So we partner with many organizations through their corporate social responsibility efforts, and it makes a big difference. And honestly, we get so many volunteers and people that want to be involved.
What are the common threads in the wellness programs that organizations that you've worked with have used to achieve that stickiness that you just described?
Sure. So, people love to do something and feel like they've accomplished something. So there are various ways that we work with our sponsors, with our organization. One is they love to volunteer at our events. They love to send a team to volunteer at our gala or to volunteer at our leadership conference, or they will send a team of people to, there's a team coming on October 14th, and we've just moved, so they're going to clean out our storage area because we have so much stuff that we've gone through. They're going to clean out our storage area. We've had a team come from one of our sponsors, and they'll do mystery gifts for our gala. They'll buy the little gifts and they'll wrap them. And I mean, the ways it's unlimited. We have a team of people come and they'll make Thanksgiving baskets for our domestic violence. So that's one way. Is to volunteer. People still love leadership and training development. You create that stickiness, you kind of send your team to a purpose-driven leadership development, kind of like what the Women's Center does in their leadership conference. So there are so many ways. And just hearing about organizations finding ways to donate and volunteer, when employees see that with their employers, it means something to them. It shows that their employers care about the community.
Are there things that you've seen in your discussions, both with the people at the kind of the rank and file level and the organizational leadership? Are there disconnects where there are things that the folks that are the constituents of these programs, the consumers of these programs, are saying, boy, I wish we had this or that resource, that the leadership is going, well, that's not something that's on our radar screen, or that's not something that we really considered that maybe would help to close that gap?
No, I think that what I see from the leaders of organizations is a real struggle to, of course, to get people back into the office, which we could talk about for hours and hours, but it's really kind of engaging the hearts and minds. And I find that with some of the newer people, they are a little distant in things like that. So I think I think that's where the disconnect is, and that's where the challenge is how do we really capture people's hearts and minds? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure leaders have quite figured that out. I mean, people that do corporate social responsibility, they've kind of figured it out, but other folks still have not kind of caught on to that, honestly.
One of the things that people in government are always looking for is a metric. I've achieved this number, so I know that I am doing okay, or I didn't make that number, so I know that I need to pivot in some way. Is there a way to measure resilience? Is there a way to gauge that kind of thing, short of some of the tools that human capital operations in government have, like federal employee viewpoint survey numbers and those kinds of things?
I'm not sure how a corporation would measure resilience, but I know as a community, there are many community needs assessment that are done, and they look at resilience. I would say in terms of, again, it's all about ability to function. Like, we ask questions around, how is your ability to function with your family or work? Do you feel like you can, like, if you say you're going to go to the gym and one of your goals is go to the gym, are you going to the gym? Are you cooking? So I think this is how we measure resilience, is how are you functioning? I'm not really sure how a corporation would measure resilience, truly.
Well, but it strikes me that if you're doing that on an individual basis, that then when you gather that collective data over the scale of an enterprise, the size of a federal agency, you probably have a pretty good indicator of where you are from an enterprise level. Is that a fair read on my part?
Yeah, I think so. I think as a corporate leader, I myself am always trying to do surveys to engage. Are people engaged? Are they going to stay? What's the retention? We're always doing surveys to figure things out.
Rachna, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
You can read more about the Women's Center in today's show notes at fedgovtoday.com.